Story 1. A strange man broke in and I was sexually assaulted. Please, I do not want pity or expressions of sympathy. Law enforcement worked tirelessly to solve my case. The perpetrator was caught, and through the combined DNA index system, they were able to confirm it was indeed him. I can honestly say I am now a stronger woman and I do not live in fear. I can stay home alone just fine with my Glock and my mighty Chihuahua by my side. Sometimes what does not kill us indeed makes us stronger. Story 2. I heard my dog growling in the hallway. When I looked, he was in full attack mode, staring at nothing. His tail was down and his teeth were bared. Then he backed up into the room and sat behind me. What did you see? Story 3. Not really scary, more startling. I used to live in a studio apartment on the first floor in a rough part of the city. One night around 1 a.m., I was sitting on my couch watching television and smoking a bowl. The place was small, so the window to my right was close to the next building, with only a 6-foot alley between them. Suddenly, a light shone onto me through the window. It was a member of the Special Weapons and Tactics team pointing a shotgun at me. I was just sitting there, very stoned, with the bowl in my hand. We stared at each other for a moment. Then he waved at me and left. It turned out they were raiding the building next to mine for some reason. Story 4. A man came to the door and said he was with the electric company and needed to see the meter. He had the wrong name for the person who lives in the house. He then slowly pushed his way inside and said he just needed to look around the corner until he was fully inside. Luckily, my father came back and then the man left. Story 5. I used to struggle to sleep and was a very light sleeper. I was semi-conscious and heard what I thought was my garden gate opening. I shrugged it off and tried to go back to sleep. Then, I heard another strange noise from outside and decided to look out of the window onto the rear garden. I could not see anything, but my gate was open. I was certain I had closed it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow from the streetlight and looked directly down to see 2 men trying to break the lock on my back door. I shouted, and luckily they both ran off. I did not sleep properly for about 2 months after that. Story 6. I went to bed around midnight on Halloween night, and about 5 minutes later, heard the worst howling and screaming outside my bedroom window I have ever heard. It sounded like a woman being murdered. I peeked through the curtain and saw a fox howling in the middle of my yard in a circle of moonlight like it was a spotlight. It was scary and spooky. It has not happened again, and this was 20 years ago. Story 7. I once heard a knock on my bedroom window at around 2 a.m. I live on the 3rd floor, and there is no balcony. I still do not know how that happened. Story 8. I'm not sure if it was the scariest, but it is one that sticks out to me. A couple of years ago, I was home alone and choked on a piece of a quesadilla. The feeling of realizing you cannot breathe in or out is absolutely terrifying. I was able to get it unstuck with a hit to my chest, but the brief moment of not being able to breathe scared me enough that I was shaking quite badly. I went back and watched our doorbell camera footage of when it happened, and you can see the fear in my eyes. Story 9. I accidentally choked on water and no one was around. I could not breathe. I ran outside so people could see me in case I passed out. Luckily, I was able to cough it out eventually. Story 10. There was a black bear outside on my deck staring into the kitchen window while I was eating at the kitchen table. I thought it was a big black dog at first, so I went to bang on the window to make it go away. As I approached, it turned away, and I saw the massive animal in full. I nearly had a heart attack, so I backed away from the window, and the bear casually strolled away. Story 11. After I got my wisdom teeth removed, my parents went to the supermarket, and I messed with my gauze, removing it. Blood started gushing from the wounds. I was able to handle it, but it was terrifying losing so much blood from my head. I also recall at my last apartment hearing the sound of a woman seemingly escaping an apartment or running from a partner. There were very blood-curdling screams around midnight. It was one of the few times I called emergency services. Story 12. Some criminals sawed off the tubing for my gas line. They were after the copper. My younger brother and I were home alone. We were still kids at the time, and the thought that someone would be stupid enough to do this didn't cross my mind. It was around midnight when I heard scratching against the walls, which was scary by itself. I almost soiled myself. Every time I went to check it, the sound stopped. It didn't occur to me that it could be people messing with the tubing because it was about 15 feet off the ground. Whenever I leaned over to look out to the street from my roof, there was nothing. No people, no animals, no trash. I have no idea how they scattered so fast. This continued for around 40 minutes. Then I started to smell something like a dead animal. It was an overwhelming smell that started to fill the house. Now I know gas and death have a similar smell. I opened most of my windows because of the stench, and that probably saved our lives since we went to sleep without knowing what was wrong. We woke up to my uncle slamming the front door until it broke down. He was screaming our names. The whole street smelled of gas. I had a raging headache, felt really nauseated, and couldn't understand what was going on for a minute or two. Our next-door neighbor had sounded the alarm early in the morning as she was getting ready for work. She called my mother, but she was on vacation, so she then called my uncle, who rushed to our house. We could have suffocated. We could have exploded, just because some people wanted a few dollars worth of copper tubing. Even though they obviously didn't care about the people inside, they didn't think about themselves dying because of their idiocy. A spark could have ended us all. Still baffles me to this day. Story 13. I had just moved into a new apartment, and my roommate was working a late shift. It was around 10 p.m., and I was on the phone with my high school best friend. I suddenly got an eerie feeling and told her that I felt I needed to go make sure my door was locked. As soon as I confirmed the door was locked and turned around, someone began loudly banging on the door, yelling, "Let me in!" He proceeded to pound loudly on my door, trying to get in and knocking something off the wall. My friend was still on the phone and said, "How did you know that was going to happen? You need to call the police." The man ended up getting arrested and apparently knew the former tenants. That was 20 years ago, and I am still very cautious about locking my doors at all hours of the day. Story 14. I found out that a stranger was breaking into my house and placing cameras in the vents. She would hide in the attic and watch me talk with my family. Story 15. 5 individuals scoped out my house, banging on doors, essentially casing the place for anyone home. I had to tell them verbally to leave. I did not sleep for 2 days. I still have nightmares about home intruders. Now I know where the guns are. Not that I am planning to use them, just good to know. For context, I live in rural central Missouri. No one should be approaching my front door whom I do not know. Story 16. I was taking care of the family dogs while everyone was on holiday, and one of them urinated on the black sheepskin rug, so I put it in the washer. I then completely forgot about it for 3 days. Unfortunately, I had recently watched The Grudge, which terrified me. A feature of the demon in the film is her black hair appearing to come out of a plug hole and other places. 3 days later, I went to put a wash on. I knelt down to open the washer door, and a black, wet mass of hair slowly slumped out towards me. I was so scared that my knees froze to the floor, and my upper body was almost seizure-like as I couldn't figure out how to escape. I ended up falling backward while my dogs were panicking over the confusion behind me. I realized what had happened and just lay there, accepting my mistake and comforting the dogs. Story 17. I was home alone after school for about 2 hours until my parents came home from work. I was about 12 years old. One day, I was in my room and heard someone coming up the stairs. I went out into the hall and saw a man. When he saw me, he turned and ran. I ran to the neighbors and they called the police, but he was never found. It was assumed he was a would-be burglar. Looking back, I think about how I could have been harmed. I have no idea how 12-year-old me startled him into fleeing. Story 18. My mom had left me by myself. Instead of setting the normal burglar alarm, she set the alarm that goes off if it senses motion. When I went to get food, the burglar alarm went off and I thought the house was being robbed. I was only about 12. Story 19. In mid-2020, I was living alone as my mother had just passed shortly before COVID-19 struck. We were still in that period of uncertainty regarding COVID-19. All the streets were empty. Everything was very quiet and eerie. It was a cold, rainy night, around 3 a.m., when suddenly I woke up to my doorbell ringing. It was not uncommon for me to dream of my doorbell, so I just ignored it and went back to sleep. A few minutes later, it rang again. I woke up immediately and sat in bed, thinking it could be a drunkard or some random teenager from the neighborhood. I waited for a moment, and when it did not ring again, I went back to sleep. Once again, it rang. At this moment, I was fully alert. I sneakily went up to our living room window and took a peek outside. Nobody was there. It rang again. My heart was racing. I called out to anyone that could be there. No response. Where I live, there are walls and tall gates in front of every house, so I thought there could be someone hiding behind my front wall and ringing the doorbell. I imagined it could be a burglar waiting to ambush me if I went outside. I sneaked to the dining room, which had a side door that was a little more hidden and silent than our main door. I went outside in the rain and took a peek over the wall. The front yard was higher relative to street level. Not a single soul. The doorbell rang again. I realized it was probably an electrical problem and that it was ringing by itself every 5 minutes. Story 20. This is from my past. I was home alone because my mother was out shopping. I was cleaning up when suddenly my mother's Amazon Alexa started playing inappropriate content on loudspeaker. I yelled, "Hey Alexa, stop," and it immediately stopped. Story 21. I wasn't completely alone. It was my daughter and me. About 7 or 8 years ago, a random man tried to get into our house. I heard the doorknob turning on a door we never used. I peeked out and saw a man I had never seen before. He spent some time trying to open it. I hid in an upstairs room with my daughter while I called for help. He was gone before anyone arrived. We are very vigilant about keeping our doors locked now. Story 22. I was at home and kept hearing thumping upstairs. I thought one of my roommates was home and in the bathroom. The noise was coming from right above me. I kept hearing footsteps and shuffling around, like someone was dragging their feet. A few hours later, my roommate showed up. I told her about it and she brushed it off as pipes or something. We joked that the apartment was haunted and laughed. She headed upstairs, and I heard a scream that turned my blood cold. She bolted downstairs and into the car. I followed and we called the police. My roommate said she reached into the closet to turn on a light and felt a hand on her arm and a man's voice pleading with her for help. Police were notified but arrived an hour later. They searched the apartment and found no one. The deadbolt on the back door and all the windows were locked. The only escape was through the front, but there was no way he could have run by us without being seen. Story 23. I was about 10 years old and left home alone because I did not want to go to a wedding. I was showering when I saw someone peeking through the window. At the time, I was horrified, thinking it was a demon or something. Now I know it was a pervert. It was still scary because he could have broken into my house. Story 24. When you have a father who occasionally sold drugs, sometimes someone he upset would come knocking. I learned this the hard way when I was 9 years old and a very big and intimidating man tried to kick in my back door. Fortunately, I had a large and scary dog that scared him away, but the way my father reacted when I told him was shocking. I had never seen him turn pale like that before. This happened in the early 1990s. This man was reportedly suspected of harming the children of people he was angry with. When I was older, I asked my father about him again. He explained that the man was upset about the poor quality of what he sold him and intended to kidnap me, harm me in ways I cannot detail here, and then sell me to others who would continue these actions. The man was also HIV positive. So, thank you, Dad, for nearly getting me kidnapped, trafficked, infected with HIV, and possibly killed because you sold bad drugs to the wrong person. Story 25. At random times, only one of my cats will stop what she is doing and stare at the ceiling or a wall, looking around as if she is tracking something. But there is literally nothing there. What are you seeing that I do not see? Story 26. I was lying down facing away from my bedroom entrance. I was trying to fall asleep when I felt the bed behind me slightly sink, as if someone was kneeling or trying to get on it. I heard someone say, "Mom, hey Mom." The voice sounded like a teenage boy. This happened a few weeks ago. There was no one there, and I still cannot explain it. Story 27. As a young boy, I was home alone on a lunch break from school with a freshly recorded off-satellite television by a friend VHS tape containing the movie Showgirls. I had been spending about 10 to 15 minutes fast-forwarding through and stopping at all the revealing parts when there was a knock at the window behind me. I jumped out of my skin. It was Dad asking to be let in because I had locked the front door. I quickly went to the VHS player to eject the tape and said I would be right there. Thankfully, there were no revealing scenes on the television at that moment. Story 28. My mom was friends with a coworker. The coworker's boyfriend was a creep who tried to break into my house while my mom was out. He left when my sister yelled, "We have a gun!" I was 14 and my sisters were younger. Story 29. After a natural disaster, a couple of men came through my neighborhood at about 2 a.m. and banged on the door. I got really upset, opened the door, and explained that no normal person would be making social calls at 2 a.m. Fortunately, they had the wrong house and moved on to the correct yard. It was very strange. I thought they were burglars under the influence of methamphetamine. Story 30. The shower in the en-suite turned itself on at 2 a.m., albeit briefly, while I was asleep in my bedroom, which was not the same room as the en-suite. I slept with 3 very sharp knives and nail scissors within easy reach for the rest of my parents' holiday. Story 31. When I was a teenager, my mom had this creepy, controlling friend on and off. He had a weird fixation on teenage girls. One night, when I was 17, I went with my mom to the hospital, and she ended up having to stay the night there. I had work the next morning, so she called that friend to take me home. By this point, it was about midnight. The ride home was strange because he sat next to me in the back seat while a sketchy couple, whom my mom and I never met, drove up front. They smoked weed while driving. The friend offered me a cigarette, and I took it, planning to give it to my mom later. He came to his senses and took it back, but still, it was an uncomfortable car ride. When I got out, he insisted on following me to the door. By then, it was about 2 a.m. My mom and brother were gone, but I can't remember where. The man walked me right to the door. I unlocked it, and he grabbed the handle, saying he was just going to take a quick peek inside, because he was disturbingly curious about what the inside of our house looked like. We absolutely did not let him inside. So, it was 2 a.m., I was 17, and I was with this older man I did not trust after a strange car ride home. He tried to force his way into the house, but luckily he was weak, and I managed to push him away from the door a few times until he finally said something like, "What the heck? You're weird," and stormed off to his friends in the car. I went inside after he left and quickly locked and checked both doors. He was bizarre. This happened about 5 years ago, and I don't let people walk me to the door anymore. Story 32. I was washing my dishes when I saw a man covered in blood jump over my fence and run to my neighbor's backyard, followed by 2 police officers doing the same. They all continued to run while I got out and followed them because I was curious about what was happening. It turned out the man had tried to kill himself by stabbing himself repeatedly. He stopped on the lawn of the funeral home, which was sadly ironic. I saw the 2 large knives. The officers talked to him for a while and apparently took him to the hospital. I think about him from time to time and hope he is okay. Story 33. When I was a teenager, my parents were out and I was home alone. There was a storm, and apparently a microburst hit right in front of my house. I heard a loud boom, and a large section of the tree in front broke off, hit the window I was sitting in front of, rolled over the roof, and landed in the backyard. It barely missed the overhead power line leading to the house. Story 34. A tornado hit within 2 miles of my house when I was near the end of my sophomore year of high school. I was not alone. My brother had just returned from school. Within 10 minutes, the sky darkened, rain poured, and the wind was strong enough to push the rain sideways. I think it blew over a small tree or 2 as well. Story 35. I get partial focal seizures, also known as absence seizures. Feels like the lights are on in my brain, but no one is home. Sometimes I have auditory hallucinations. I thought they were controlled by my medication, but I was wrong. I thought I woke up on the floor, but I had no memory of being in that room. I heard a male and female voice talking outside my window, but no one was there. Later, I saw my phone and realized I had sent an incoherent stream of texts to my husband. It was pretty terrifying. My brain was trying to work but was just misfiring. Story 36. A number of years ago, I was homeless in a tent at the edge of the woods. I came back to my tent late one night, using a small flashlight to make my way down the path. About 40 feet to my right, I saw a cougar sitting upright, watching me. I got into my tent, zipped it shut, and didn't move. You know how park rangers sometimes feel like they are being hunted? I felt a pressure in my head like, murder, murder, murder. It got stronger and more intense. After about 2 minutes, it gradually faded away as if the cougar finally wandered off. Story 37. I was in a boutique hotel in an extraordinarily old house in London. Our room had 2 doors right after each other, so it was like an extra room that was only just big enough to stand up in. My husband wanted to go see some friends of his I didn't know, so we decided he would be fine to go alone. I decided to stay home, drink the white wine from the minibar, and read a filthy romantic novel. His phone didn't work in the United Kingdom, so he couldn't call me unless he was somewhere with Wi-Fi. So he looked up directions, took a screenshot, and went out. He initially went out on Tuesday evening and texted me from a Starbucks Wi-Fi when he got close to the meeting place. But it turned out he got the day wrong, so he turned around and came home. He went out the next night to the same meeting place. My husband is shy and had never met these internet friends before, so I was only expecting him to be gone for about 2 hours. By the time he had been gone for 4.5 hours and it was almost midnight, I was starting to panic. He couldn't call me. He somehow got lost. He got murdered. His friends had murdered him. I was going to have to tell the London Metropolitan Police that I let my husband of less than a year out into a city. He was in for the first time with a phone that didn't work to meet people neither of us knew, and now he was dead in a ditch. I was going to end up in an Agatha Christie novel, and Hercule Poirot was going to disapprove of me. I was lying in bed listening to a podcast quietly, trying to think about what I should do, when I heard a soft knock on the outer door. I wasn't completely sure I heard it, but I decided to get my dressing gown on and answer it just in case my husband couldn't get the key from the front desk or something. While I was putting on my dressing gown, I heard the knock on the outer door again, louder this time, loud enough that I called out that I was coming. Of course, when I got through to the outer door, the hallway was empty. The hotel was ancient and every step creaked. It also wasn't crowded. I rarely saw other guests at all. It absolutely wasn't a case of another guest knocking on the wrong door, realizing, and leaving. I would have heard them. I really got badly spooked then, because obviously this meant my husband was 109% dead in a ditch and this was his soul coming back to say goodbye. In the end, he came home absolutely fine. He just hit it off with the friends and forgot to text me. I never found an explanation for what happened, but that's the most spooked I have been while home alone. Except for now, because I creeped myself out so badly that my husband coming home from work made me jump out of my skin. Story 38. I rented an old house for a little over a year. I found out later that an older man had died in that house previously. One afternoon, I heard a loud boom come from downstairs. I went to see what it was, and the bathroom sink was running at full force. Only the hot water was flowing. This was an old-fashioned sink, and the faucets had to be twisted really hard to turn the water on. I have no idea how it happened. I left after the lease ended because not only did that incident freak me out, but the basement also flooded a few times, and the property management did not help me with any of it. Story 39. Small earthquake. I was in New Hampshire, the last place you would expect one. I think it was around a magnitude 3.1 or something like that. It barely registered. I just saw everything shake in the house. I was by myself for about 2 more hours before my parents got home to explain it. Story 40. My kitchen door's doorbell shorted out in the middle of the night. My dogs react to doorbells loudly. The front door doorbell rings, ding dong. The kitchen doorbell rings, ding. The dogs came unglued and ran to the kitchen, barking like danger was there. I opened the door and no one was there, so I went back to bed. Then it happened again, so I tiptoed to the door and flung it open. No one was there, so I ran to the front door. No one was there. I ran back to the kitchen door. No one was there. I screamed expletives. I am on a very isolated farm at the end of a 3/8 of a mile driveway through forest with no visible neighbors. After I screamed, I headed back to bed, and the kitchen doorbell rang again before I was out of the room. I put on shoes, got my .22 caliber rifle, and let the dogs out. We quickly walked around the whole house. I was starting to think maybe it was a raccoon or some kind of nocturnal bird pecking bugs off the button since it is lit up. But as soon as I stepped back into my kitchen, the doorbell rang again. I decided it was a doorbell part malfunctioning, so I pulled the bell apart and disconnected all the wires. The issue was resolved until my husband came home. He was grumpy about having to figure out how to put it back together, and even grumpier when he looked inside the bell and saw it had a battery backup. Apparently, one of the batteries was defective. He figured out how to reattach all the wires. Technology had progressed to have batteries that lasted much longer, and life was good again. Story 41. The first time I was left alone for a week, on the first day, there was a bat in my room. I had never seen a bat in person, much less in the house before. But there it was, just waiting for me. Story 42. One Christmas, 2 burglars tried to rob my house. Fortunately, I overheard their plans to break in and had time to set up booby traps throughout the house. This led to some humorous situations, and it all worked out in the end with the help of my neighbor, Old Man Marley. He knocked them both out with his shovel, and they were arrested. Story 43. I have 2 stories. The first one is less interesting. In both, I was a child living in the country. In the first story, a really loud bang happened on the other end of the house. It sounded like a heavy object fell on the floor. It scared me so much that I ran out of the house and thought I would never go back inside. But after about 10 minutes, I went back in to investigate. The sound was like a 1990s television falling on the floor. If you know, you know. When I looked, I couldn't find anything strange. Everything was normal. So, I have no idea what that really loud, shaking boom was. The other scary incident is much stranger. In the same home, I was watching television. I have told this story many times. Suddenly, the television went to static and cut out. Keep in mind, this was around 10 p.m., and I was a 9-year-old kid home alone in a country house, and our television had never done that before. The screen showed static and snow and made loud ksh noises. I was really uncomfortable but was lying on the couch, thinking I would just wait it out and that it was just the signal getting loose. While I was lying there waiting, my eyes wandered to our dining room mirror. In the mirror, I saw a strange floating, bloody-looking skull. I froze for a second, not sure what I was seeing, but then I got really scared as the television was still loud with KSSSH static. I had a cordless phone next to me, so I picked it up to call my mom. But when I pressed the call button, I got a dead dial tone. There was no reception. Instead of the normal dial tone you hear before making a call, it was more like empty silence, almost as if the phone was dead. I started to panic and did not know what to do, but then headlights illuminated the living room. It was my dad coming home from work. Just as his lights entered, the television suddenly flickered back on to normal. I looked at the dining room mirror and did not see the skull anymore, floating around red and bloody looking. I reached for the cordless phone, turned it on, and it made its normal dial tone noise, signifying it was functional. It was such a strange experience, and I swear by it. Even though I am an atheist, skeptical, and a believer in science, and I think paranormal activity is really dumb, I am not sure why I have this memory. Story 44. I was extremely high, and the house was creaking a lot. I was completely convinced someone was in the house. I was terrified. Story 45. I was once playing some games on my personal computer, and behind me I saw something moving really fast, and it went under my bed. Also, I had a couple of weird dreams where I saw a huge dark spider crawling beside me. I was half awake. Story 46. This was years ago, around 2003 to 2004. I was about 15 years old, left home alone to watch the dogs all weekend while my parents and siblings went to a soccer tournament a few states away. It was around 1 to 1:30 a.m., and I was still awake playing Morrowind on my computer that I had moved down and hooked to the big TV in the family room. There were lots of cords and connections back then. Mid-game, I heard an insanely loud beep from behind me, in the kitchen. I had not gotten up in hours. Dinner had been pizza rolls or something in the oven, but that was hours ago, and both the oven and microwave were showing the clock, not a timer. I figured I just heard it and went back to playing. A few minutes later, one of the dogs started crying in the kitchen. Then I heard the beep again, quiet like an old digital watch going off. It kept getting louder and louder, as if it was coming up from a deep hole, muffled as if underwater. When it reached its loudest, that was the last time I heard it. There was then a loud boom-like noise outside, and the older neighborhood behind my parents' newer subdivision went dark. The next day, I found out what caused the boom. A transformer was shorting out, causing electrical disturbances in the air that made something in my house beep. The beeping stopped when the transformer finally exploded. It has never happened again, and my parents still live there. Story 47. Scared out of my mind. I was sitting on my couch watching television around 9 p.m. I lived on the bottom floor of a very rural house at the time that had a flight of stairs down to my front door. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a large group running down the stairs to my front door. I froze. I didn't move a muscle for minutes, like a scared 5-year-old. Finally, I gathered the courage to grab my shotgun from another room and walk to the front door to look outside. I turned on the outside light and saw nothing through the window in the front door. I walked to the kitchen window, which overlooks the front yard, only to see a small black bear walking along the yard. The only conclusion I could draw was that a bear fell down my stairs. A bear fell down the stairs. I also found out that when faced with fight, flight, or freeze, I freeze. Story 48. I wasn't home alone necessarily, but it was 2 a.m., and my parents were fast asleep. My room was on the other side of the house, so I might as well have been alone. There was a severe storm outside, and I was just on my personal computer playing EVE Online when the landline phone started ringing. Now, it is not uncommon for the phone to ring once or twice during a storm, likely due to lightning striking near the phone lines. But this time, it kept ringing. Eventually, I picked it up and asked who was calling. The moment I did, I felt something standing behind me. It was not just a vague feeling. It was an overwhelming presence that froze me in place and prevented me from turning around to see it. There was a voice on the phone, but it sounded like someone screaming underwater. This continued for about 5 minutes until the phone cut out, and the presence I felt behind me disappeared immediately. The creepier part was that the phone was a set of wireless handheld devices, and there was one in my parents' room as well. For some reason, they never heard it. The house was one of 3 fairly isolated lots on a mountain in a very rural part of Tennessee. Story 49. An attempted home invasion by 2 men who were trying to enter through my closed kitchen window at 9 a.m. on a weekday. Story 50. I lived alone at the time and was on my couch. The shower came on upstairs. I walked up there with a gun, and it turned off. Later that day, it happened again. Story 51. Someone was knocking on my door for 10 minutes at 11:30 at night. I did not answer, but they came back to knock more. I called the police. My husband, who is a police officer at another department, called my neighbor to make her aware, and I pulled out my gun. Apparently, other neighbors farther down the street were being badgered and also called the police. It is a very quiet neighborhood, so this was out of the ordinary. Story 52. My mother passed away when I was 15, and my alcoholic father used to spend a lot of time in the pub in the evenings, so I was often home alone. Someone used to call our landline and masturbate while on the phone. Other times, they would tell me to kill myself. I would hang up the phone and then pick it up 5 minutes later to try to call someone, and they would still be on the line. I never found out who it was, and it was terrifying. Story 53. The ghosts in my old house kept slamming doors. I experienced sleep paralysis once, but thanked them for slamming a door because it snapped me out of it. Story 54. It was about 11 at night, and I was spraying the front door jamb with insect repellent when it occurred to me that I should probably step outside and do it with the door closed. Muscle memory caused me to lock the door behind me, locking myself out with my sleeping baby inside her room in the crib. My phone was also locked inside the apartment. My husband was at work for a few more hours. I did not know any neighbors yet. The head maintenance person lived on the property, just in the building behind us, but that meant I had to leave. I ran over, rang the doorbell, and felt terrible waking his whole family. It was awful. I ran back to my front door, and he met me there with the key. The baby was totally fine and still asleep. It took all night for me to recover from how careless I was. Story 55. About 20 years ago, I woke up and went into the living room around 6 to 7 a.m. After a few minutes, I heard chains dragging and footsteps coming down the wooden floor in the hall, which was highly unusual since I was the only one awake. I was sitting on a chair in the living room and still had my cover. I went under it, terrified. I had never been scared like this before. The jingling sound and footsteps came closer, then suddenly stopped in the hall. About 5 seconds later, I felt an aura of someone standing in front of me. Then I heard breathing. I cannot explain how scared I was at this point. The breathing eventually stopped, and I could not hear anything, but I did not come out from under the cover. I ended up staying there for about 10 to 15 minutes until I fell asleep. I woke up to my mother coming in around 9 a.m., asking why I was sleeping on the chair. I told her, and she laughed, saying I was imagining it. Maybe I was, but at the age of 32, I remember it perfectly. It did not feel like sleep paralysis or anything similar. It was probably the only time I have truly been scared. Story 56. Choked on a sweet, had to bang myself against a wall to dislodge it. I have hated living alone ever since. It was the scariest minute of my life. Story 57. Parents were out. I was at home, maybe 12 years old. Numerous break-ins had occurred in the area. I was playing my 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System when my dog suddenly raised his head and looked at the back door. The doorknob turned and someone tried opening it. Thankfully, it was locked. The dog started barking. Then I heard footsteps going to the window behind where I sat. I quickly reached under the couch to get something. That particular window's latch was broken. I heard the screen slide open. Then hands roughly came through the blinds. Then came the sound of footsteps frantically running away. Whoever it was didn't like the end of a shotgun, I guess. Story 58. I was not home alone and it did not happen to me. My brother was staying over at my house and sleeping in the basement. One of my dogs loved to sleep in the basement with him, and the other was upstairs with me. Partway through the night, the dog with him got up and walked toward the furnace room. The door was shut. She barked at the door and then ran upstairs. To frighten my brother. Story 59. I was doing dishes late one night in my first apartment after college when I heard what sounded like someone trying to turn the door handle. The handle kept jiggling for about 30 seconds while I stood there frozen with soapy hands, trying to figure out if I should grab a knife or call someone. It turned out my upstairs neighbor was drunk and trying to get into the wrong apartment. He was very embarrassed the next morning when he realized what had happened. Those 30 seconds of pure terror really stick with you, especially when you are living alone for the first time and every sound feels amplified. Story 60. I choked on a piece of spiced meat and could not breathe, swallow, or spit it out. So I just stood there, waiting, literally doing nothing except feeling that I was going to die alone, naked, in the dark. I don't remember if I swallowed it or spit it out, but after a few seconds, evolution took over and I could breathe again. I spent the rest of the night in an existential crisis, realizing I could have died right there. Story 61. I was home alone with my dog. It was night, and I was getting ready to go to sleep when my dog started barking and running around the house like crazy, but never leaving the front door facing the outside of the house. Between one bark and another, I realized there was a strange noise coming from the door in the courtyard. I went to the kitchen to look outside better since the kitchen is above the courtyard, and I saw a man's figure run away. Story 62. Reading this and hearing a screaming sound by myself out on the country farm. Hopefully it was an animal. Going to check on the animals. Really bad timing. Story 63. After a hurricane in Florida, the crime from the affected area moved to mine. We lived in an apartment in a fairly safe area, so while doing laundry in the communal laundry room, I left the door unlocked to run back and forth. Suddenly, the door opened and a young man walked in. He stopped when he saw me, muttered "wrong apartment," and left. I locked the door and bought a pump-action Mossberg the next day. Story 64. People broke in while I was sleeping. I woke up briefly when they turned on my bedroom light, but thought it was my son's friend looking for the bathroom. We had not lived there long. I went back to sleep and realized in the morning that people had come in. Story 65. Not totally alone, but close. In the 2000s, we had an intercom system between my room in the basement and the kitchen upstairs on the main floor. My little sister, who was in elementary school, and I, about 13 years old at the time, came home from school one day and walked into the kitchen. I heard a man saying, "Hello? Hello?" through the intercom. I pushed my sister into the garage and told her to run outside and hide while I grabbed a baseball bat and stormed downstairs. As I opened the door to my basement bedroom, ready to swing, I heard some static from the intercom followed by a click. Nobody was there. I believe the intercom picked up an original generation car or mobile phone signal, similar to someone trying to call while connecting to dial-up internet. Story 66. I posted the whole story on Reddit Creepy Encounters, but someone tapped on my window behind me one night. The blinds were wide open and all the lights were on inside my fenced-in backyard. They tapped many times. I have no idea how long they had been watching me. Story 67. Living in a different state far away from home with my ex-husband, who was in the military at the time. We lived in a nice gated community with a gym and a pool. Our apartment was on the top floor, and the front door led straight into the living room. One night, I was watching TV in the dark when someone started turning the handle of my front door. I was home alone because my ex-husband was on deployment. I quickly muted the TV and froze. It was terrifying. The noise lasted about a minute but felt like forever. It was very scary. I never found out who it was or what they wanted. Story 68. Fell at work while I had undiagnosed cancer, with a tumor compressing my vein and a small blood clot. I was extremely sore, and walking became increasingly difficult. The next day, I woke up in severe pain, and my leg was significantly swollen and barely movable. I went to the emergency room with classic symptoms and a leg about 50% larger than normal. I was sent home with the diagnosis of a bruise. I had no idea what was happening while I struggled to get around for 10 days, with my parents out of the country. The ice baths I took to reduce swelling could have been dangerous. If it were not for my psychiatrist, who was formerly a surgeon and recognized the severity of my condition, my appointment would have been canceled. He told me to go to the emergency room immediately. A friend drove me, and the psychiatrist contacted a vascular surgeon he knew, who was so concerned he cleared his schedule and arrived 20 minutes after us. I got through the emergency room quickly, but the situation was extremely serious. I was terrified and had no idea what was happening. Story 69. Mi sveglio sempre 2 o 3 volte ogni notte. Una notte, dopo essermi svegliata, ho visto di fronte a me una specie di bambola di porcellana in bianco e nero con statura di un essere umano medio. Era strana perché sembrava una bambina, ma era alta. Da quella notte, prima di addormentarmi, guardo sempre il punto in cui ho visto la bambola o la bambina. Comunque, ho letto gli altri commenti e credo che stanotte non dormirò. Story 70. There used to be a homeless man who would routinely walk through our backyard, climb the wall, and sleep in the alley between us and a plaza. One night, while sitting in the car, I saw him walk into our fenced-in house. When I went to the back, he was nowhere to be found. It was not until he did that one day when I was home alone that I was able to see exactly where he would go. Story 71. This happened about 7 years ago. I was in my mom's basement watching scary compilations. I still watch them to this day, but I don't live with my mom. When there was a pause in the video, I heard knocking from the furnace room. I paused the video to make sure I heard correctly, and another knock followed. I didn't move for a moment, then I got up and checked, but there was nothing there. Growing up, my mom said a ghost had been following me since I was a baby. The story is that my mom lived in an apartment with my dad. Before they moved in, a man had killed himself in that apartment, and since they moved in, the ghost apparently followed me around. I have a vivid memory of seeing a dark shadow by the coats in the apartment. He wore a hat, though I can't remember what kind. I was only about 1 year old. He had white glowing eyes. Story 72. The first time my mom left me home alone, I was 12 and it was for about 15 minutes. It was supposed to help me get comfortable with being home alone. It was a nice summer evening and I was in the living room watching TV, with the windows open. Suddenly, our husky and German shepherd started acting really strange. The shepherd was patrolling and growling under the windows, and the husky was standing in front of me, vibrating. Then my German shepherd went through the screen window and the husky backed into my legs, growling so hard that spit was flying. I heard a man scream and our gate slam as both dogs lost their minds. I peeked out the screen door and saw the shepherd. I opened the door slightly and called her name. She backed into the house with clothing in her mouth. My parents have a split-level ranch and I didn't want my mom walking through the yard when she returned. So I leashed both dogs and dragged them to the garage. When I heard the car pull in, I opened the door and yelled for my mom to get inside. She did, and I told her the story, unsure of what had happened or if it was safe. She said, "Oh shoot." Let both dogs off the leash, sent them outside, then had them search the house and close the window. Strangely, it didn't scare me from being home alone. Story 73. I had a man I did not know knock on my bedroom window. The window is approximately 7 feet from the ground, so he either used a stick or stood on our air conditioning unit to reach it. Story 74. There was a thunderstorm, and I saw a white flash come from the fireplace. Then I heard a pop. Scared me a lot. Story 75. A delivery driver tried to open my front door repeatedly. He did not ring the doorbell or knock. He just kept yanking the handle to open it until he gave up and walked away. He did not even have a parcel for my house. Story 76. I was trying to fall asleep in my room, and it was around 2 a.m. My family and I are on the first floor of our building. Next to my room is my neighbor's place, which is an abandoned area with a lot of trees nearby. I was trying to fall asleep, but then, just a few feet away from me behind the wall, something or someone kept banging on something like a bucket. I really don't know what was making the noise, but it kept banging on our wall. I was very scared because it was not a cat or dog making the noise. I was sure of that. I called my mom from my bed. She was asleep in the room next to me. I don't know what it was, nor am I curious. Amen. Story 77. My husband was taking night classes for welding, and we had a 1-year-old baby who was upstairs asleep in his crib. My phone rang before caller identification, so I answered it. I couldn't hear the first few words as they mumbled something, but the last few words still stand out. They were as clear as a bell, and those words were, "Or you will die." I called the police and spoke with them about it because I suspected who was responsible for the call, even though I couldn't prove it. I felt it was a neighborhood girl with whom I had previous issues. When my husband came home, I told him about it, and he said he would handle it. The following day, he called this girl's mother and requested a meeting with her. Unfortunately, I was 4.5 months pregnant and started having contractions the night of the phone call. I saw my obstetrician gynecologist the next day. He gave me a shot in the buttocks to relax my uterus and told me to come back in 2 days for another shot. However, the day after the first shot, I awoke around 4 a.m. and was once again having contractions. I knew I was going to lose the baby, which I did. This shows what stress can do to your body. The girl's mother was apologetic about her daughter's behavior and said she would be punished. Shortly after she left our house, we heard the mother screaming at her daughter from across the street. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.